Yeah, I mean, I would say for the last couple of years, we've been talking about people should block first and look less, right? And so if you're blocking first, then really your SIEM is an after effect. And it always has been. The whole goal to a SIEM is to tell you what happened, past tense, right?
Historical.
Historical. Let's analyze and look at the logs and tell you what happened now that it's too late. And that's fine. And it has its job in forensics. It has its job in risk mitigation. But in terms of protect me, yeah, not so much.
So break the conversation into governance, GRC, governance risk conversation versus IT SecOps.
Yep.
So if you're concerned about GRC, whodunit, cookie crumbs, Hansel and Gretel kind of stuff, then auditor, that would be SIEM, traditional,
Yep.
right? Okay.
And what we see is now that everyone is running around at home, everything is more diversified. People are in 365 more than they ever were before. People are on Windows 10. These systems are updating naturally whenever they want to, because everyone complained about being up to date. So Microsoft is shoving that down everyone's throat now. And so, in that world, the SIEM is even less valuable.
Like, why would Carbon Black, why would Microsoft ever want to ingest the logs from Carbon Black?
They would actually. So you can get Microsoft Sentinel, and it will want to. The question is, will these cloud providers make it easy? Whether it's CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, any of these, are they going to make it easy to see the logs? And then the next piece that's very important is, are the logs any use? So, for example, it's one thing and this to me is why SIEMs have been going downhill, is it's one thing to say you collect the logs, but then can you read the logs, and then can you do something useful with the logs? And the more and more we go to a SIEM vendor and really pin them out, you end up with the scope of, okay, here's all the logs we collect. This many we can do something really cool and useful and AI driven with. This level, we can let you search, but we can't really do any of the AI stuff with.
Useful? You keep using that word, do something useful, because I look at useful as being, there's only one use, block someone from entering my facility.
So useful would mean it has enough context that you could make the decision on whether you want to block it or not, or that it doesn't take a human hours to figure out whether they can block something or not when you really needed it blocked 5 seconds later. And I think as we shift people into that kind of next gen and shift people into that cloud ready, there is enough stuff out there blocking that should be really the focus, and the SIEM should be the backseat, if you will, or the option. Because when we talk about also cookie crumbs, the same things that enable those systems to block also enable those systems to track the visibility and the context that we need to go find the cookie crumbs. I can say for the most part that the last, let's say, 4 different compromises we had to deal with, none of them were helped by a SIEM. Mm-hmm. It was always the either manual human effort to go figure something out, or the blocking products are what were able to give us the cookie crumbs of what was happening to tell us where to go look. It has never really been the SIEM. And that's because just because a SIEM has a log doesn't mean it can present it to you in a helpful, useful manner. You could think of this as, let's say the system is getting input in 100 different languages. You speak one language, and it says, okay, well, I can translate these 20 for you naturally into English, this other 30 into really, really broken English that you're going to have to concentrate on to figure it out. And the rest of them, I'm just going to put naturally, so I hope you know what buzzwords to look for. Yeah, that's what it will do.
So in to translate that would be like we were talking about before. You've got Palo doing some work here. You've got SonicWall doing some work here. You've got this endpoint protection from Microsoft. You've got routers or switches that you just have to get in your SIEM system. And then you start looking at your cloud, and then all of a sudden you now got to force all that into a SIEM. And you and I have had this long talk about this. It's a win. You cannot win that game.
Cannot win that game.
However, we can shift the focus. Less is more. We can choke on less vendors, wider scope, and then the SIEMs actually we can make them work more intelligently.
Well, and most people, when they say I want a SIEM, if it's not for a specific government requirement, and it's easy to have a log archive, by the way, to make forensics people happy. You can have a huge data warehouse log archive to make them happy. That's simple. That's easy. That's not what most SIEM vendors sell anyway. But when we talk to clients and they say, I want a SIEM, you're like, well, what's the one thing you want? Well, I want to do threat hunting. Well, then go buy a threat hunting system. Stop buying a SIEM and saying you want threat hunting. And so that's the other reason that we're finding
we're back to acronyms. Back to acronyms again.
Right, because SIEM is a popular acronym.
Yeah.
And if you go read,
I just call it SIM.
well, SIEM, whatever. It's like HIPAA. There's like 4 different ways to say HIPAA. I'm not answering that. But in reality, though, if you look at some of the compliance requirements, they still say SIEM, but some of those things haven't been updated in 8 years. You can't follow a compliance framework that hasn't truly been updated in 8 years. The world's not the same as it was 8 years ago. 8 years ago, if you said work from home, you'd be talking about people that were on old DSL and were carefully VPNing into the environment. I mean, it's just a whole totally different world.
From the people, I think everybody listening, and I don't know if we're getting any questions coming in over here, but the main thing is putting blocking systems in first is going to be your most useful way to secure in the topic areas we're talking about. And then the last conversation is, all right, do I have an auditor that floats in here, and then I have to prove what I'm doing? I have to actually prove that I'm watching these logs. But and then where are they going to want to see that? And then solving that is a separate question. But we've got to be able to block at scale and use machine learning and artificial intelligence to scale out into our environments now. And we got to do this in a very measured way with SIEM.
And the other thing is SIEM is very expensive, especially if you integrate everything. The integration alone is expensive. Getting all the third parties to do it is expensive. SIEM has a huge cost. And there's a segment of the security population that'll say SIEM is absolutely necessary. You must have it. Anyone who doesn't have it's an idiot. You have to have a SIEM. You have to have a SOC, all this stuff. But then you have business reality of what can someone afford? What can someone afford in a COVID world? What can someone afford that's going to reach out and touch everybody work from home? And that's where practicality needs to override kind of old school thinking to say, okay, I get that seems important, but it's important at the end of the game. And I need to do all the precursors of the game to get there, because there's a lot of useful things I can do that protect me day in, day out on a daily basis. And I'd rather have those than something that'll tell me after the fact that I got hosed.